Welcome, everybody. I'm Bob Griffin. I'm the Dean of the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity here at the University of Albany. Welcome. Good news and bad news. The world did not end in the year since we did our first AI panel. This is an opportunity to think about and hear and contemplate what have we learned, what was hype and what was not hype, and where we're going with artificial intelligence. I'd be remiss if I didn't note on behalf of the president of the university, Javadon Rodriguez, and our provost Carol Kim, the commitment the university has made to the AI, to artificial intelligence and our AI initiative here on campus. And I know, Jim, that you'll talk a little bit about the similar work that's being done over at RPI. What a year it's been. I don't know about you, but AI has become integral in all elements of my life, whether it's the devices I use at home, whether it's the intelligence that I read, whether it's the papers that some of you submit. AI is playing a much broader role in my life. I will note, however, you have to be careful with AI. I had one student who remained nameless for purpose reasons, who submitted the writing prompt that I had as part of my syllabus, and the paper that was turned out was how to write a memo on the subject that I asked rather than a memo on the subject that I asked. So AI is wonderful, but please proofread your work before you submit it. Couple questions to the panel to warm everybody up, and then it's going to be questions from you. If you're online, please submit questions through the Q&A feature, which is located on your Zoom bar. For you here, we have provided you with very expensive, unhackable paper cards that are in front of you. Write your questions down, hold them up, we'll bring them up front. It's high tech and it's completely AI proof right now. So let me introduce our panelists from last year. If you weren't here last year, it's all online, but I think every one of the panelists is going to mention a little bit about what they talked about last year. Our first panelist is, and they're all doctors, and they all have amazing resumes. All of their resumes are like 24 pages long, so I'm giving you the real thumbnail version. Jim Hendler is the director of Future of Computing Institute and the Tethelus World Professor of Computer, Web, and Cognitive Sciences at RPI. He's also the director of the RPI IBM Future of Computing Research Collaborative. Proudly, Jim is the man with the longest title here at the table. He's a data scientist with specific interests in open government, scientific data, data science for healthcare, AI, machine learning, semantic data integration, and the use of data in government. Having the pleasure of working with Jim for a while now, I can tell you that he, like all the other panelists, are truly Renaissance people. He's authored over 450 books, technical papers, articles in the areas of open data, the semantic web, artificial intelligence, and data policy and governance. And the beauty of AI is that they can condense them down into a couple of sentences. He's also the former chief scientist of the Information Systems Office of the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, also known as DARPA. So he comes with a really interesting background in both sciences and academia and in government. Next to Jim is Jason DeCruz, who is associate professor in our own department of philosophy here at the University of Albany. Jason taught at the little community college in Cambridge, Massachusetts, known as Harvard. Well, Harvard, as we used to say, closer to home. The Zhejiang Institute of Science and Technology in China, and has worked as a researcher at the Joint Center for Bioethics at the University of Toronto. He writes on topics of trust, promise, character, self-deception, and rationalization. Also done work in bioethics and the philosophy of art. Again, I love this background, the broadness of the field. Next to Jason is Billy Bennett-Francini, who is the director of the Center of Advancement of Teaching, Learning, and Online Education here at the University of Albany. Billy's work is in educational development, focusing on fostering meaningful student engagement through evidence-based active learning practices, including team-based learning. She also works with the faculty and graduate students in broader career development, including documentation of teaching and professional practice, building leadership skills, and productively integrating research, teaching, and service. AI would say that Billy tries to make us better teachers and less boring. So thank you for everything that you do for all of us, particularly us boring professors like myself. And finally, on our panel is Dr. Brian Nussbaum, Associate Professor from the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity. Brian focuses on cybersecurity and cyber threats, terrorism and terrorism analysis, homeland security, risk and intelligence analysis, and critical infrastructure protection. He has served as a fellow in the Cybersecurity Institute of New America, an affiliate scholar at the Center of Internet and Society at Stanford Law School, and a senior fellow with the Center of Cyber and Homeland Security at George Washington University. So thank you all of the panelists. These are the exact same panelists. They're sitting in the exact same seats they were last year. With the exception of Billy, because they're academicians, they're wearing the exact same jackets that they were wearing last year. So we're set to do a 1-year review of where we were versus where we are. Given the fact that I know that there's a lot of educators in the audience, Billy, why don't, if you don't mind starting with us, talking a little bit about what has the year brought us?
Yeah, what has the year brought us? I mean, you said earlier, or we were talking earlier about what has changed, and I said everything and nothing. I think a lot of the anxieties about AI and specifically about ChatGPT and generative AI are the same that they were last year. Faculty are very concerned, as you alluded to earlier, Dean Griffin, about students using those tools for nefarious purposes. Short-circuiting their learning, kind of messing with our credentialing systems, all that kind of stuff that can happen. There's still a lot of anxiety about that. But I think the movement toward everything changing is what I find really exciting, because I think the developments of the past year have presented a lot of opportunities for folks in higher ed, as well as in K through 12 education, to really think about teaching and learning in new ways, and really reflect on what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how they might do it differently or do it better. Of course, this largely focuses on assessment and assignments, particularly writing assignments, right? But I think when you start to make changes to how you assess student learning, you realize that you have to make changes to everything, right? And I think part of the anxiety comes out of that realization that, oh, there's really a lot of work for us to do here. And so part of what we have tried to do in working with faculty in the past year is help them find those small steps they can take that can kind of lead to those larger changes that tools like ChatGPT availability have made necessary. So I think I'm kind of excited about what is presented to us by these tools. Not just for faculty and students to use, but also for just how they make us rethink what is it we're really trying to do in the first place, and how do we, create a system that makes humans more intelligent, as well as developing artificial intelligence.
Thank you. Jim, could you talk a little bit about the changes in the state of the field and technology?
Well, let's see, I just asked ChatGPT, over the past year, what have been changed? It actually did. It gave me a long answer, which is one of the things that's changed, because previously...
Sorry, don't blame your long answer on ChatGPT. Come on, let's be nice now.
No. Hey, if I read you this, I'll be here all night. No, one of the main things that's changed is it used to say, I was only trained up until 2021. I can't talk about anything since then. Now they have found ways to bring much more recent things into it. I talked last year about some of the kind of mistakes it makes. It still makes those mistakes sometimes, but part of how they've fixed it in that system, and it's also going into several other systems, is to really integrate it with web search. So a year ago, if you had asked it what awards I had won, it would give you a great list. In fact, a list that I wish it was actually true. Now it says, searching the web, found Wikipedia, here's what Wikipedia says. I'm like, I could have done that. So it's really turning more and more into a writing and research tool than into something that pretends to have intelligence in a sort of deep sense of it. I think that the realization has been growing. A colleague of mine used this analogy, said, when we talk about artificial Christmas trees, we focus on the word artificial, not Christmas trees. But when we talk about artificial intelligence, we tend to get hung up on this intelligence. And I think what's really happening now is this stuff is going to become more and more pervasive. Microsoft is adding a co-pilot button to its keyboard. So if you're using Office or some of the other products, you'll literally be able to hit a button and bring up an AI assistant to help you with things. The killer app I heard someone suggesting the other day, I was like, this is the first time I've gotten excited about this stuff in a long time, was you have a long email thread where you're just joining in and, there are like these 50 messages. And you just hit this button and say, summarize, and it gives you like 2 paragraphs of what everybody said. I'm like, wow, So as a time saver, as a productivity tool, I think we're going to see this stuff much more integrated into our lives. The difference is that, I predicted a few times now that over the next few years, what we're going to see is more and more people using it and saying, gee, why did we ever think this thing was intelligent? What was this whole stuff about AI and the existence and all that stuff? There's still a lot of policy. There's still a lot of regulation needed, less in these tools than in a lot of other things. And then the last thing I'll say is the other thing we're seeing that's a big change is, let me call it, niche applications of this. So if I went to ChatGPT and asked it for some legal advice, or there was this famous story of some lawyers who had ChatGPT prepare their legal brief, and so it just made up some of the references, which got them in a lot of trouble. Now, companies are working to put their own stuff sort of on top of or in front of that. So now the company can say, either go to some legal entity that has made a deal with one of the AI companies, or put their own documents in, things like that. Last thing I'll say is, I know Brian's going to talk more later about regulation stuff, but one of the things that I think we really need to understand much better, whatever you say to an AI is not privilege, right? It belongs, if I go to my doctor and I say, hey, here's, my medical history, it's protected by HIPAA. If I go to ChatGPT and say, hey, I'm having headaches and this and that, and the next thing, they can sell it to whoever they want. And that information exchange, that private information exchange, has become a major business. So in fact, where a lot of the AI companies think they're going to be making their money is much less on selling AI tools than on the information they gather about you from your use of the AI tools.
Thank you. Jason, do you want to talk a little bit about ethics and if you get an opportunity to talk about that notion of sentience, that'd be great, but I can come back to it as another question as well. So
sure. Well, so maybe to start off with, I'd say that ChatGPT was a bullshitter in 2023, and ChatGPT is a bullshitter in 2024. And it's a
better bullshit.
Possibly.
so it's ready to run for the election.
And bullshitter in, I'm not just denigrating it, but really using bullshitting in this kind of technical sense, right? Technical sense given to us by the philosopher Harry Frankfurt, who distinguished a liar from a bullshitter, where a liar is a figure who deliberately tries to deceive you about someone, and a bullshitter is someone who's just indifferent to the truth. And the deliverances of ChatGPT are basically insensitive to the truth. That is, there is no ground truth that it looks for. It looks for plausible ways to continue a sentence, basically. And that fundamental problem hasn't changed. And that really has large-scale implications for our trust in what we get from these large language models. So there's this kind of Goldilocks problem in looking to these models for information, looking to these models as aids to inquiry, insofar as, on the one hand, you've got to be ignorant enough in order to have it actually be useful to ask this thing a question, but you've also got to be knowledgeable enough to be able to discern whether what it's giving you is reliable. And it's really hard to find yourself exactly in that Goldilocks spot where a tool like ChatGPT is useful for investigating, for inquiry. And one of the problems is that it sounds so fluent, and the things that it says sound so plausible that lots of those signals of expertise that we often rely on, we can no longer rely on when we are engaging with a tool like ChatGPT. Another thing that I think that's kind of changed, so that's something that hasn't changed. Something that has kind of changed, I think, on the pedagogical front, is I think that Billy is right that we've started to think much more fundamentally about how our teaching has got to change in the age of these large language models. And it's not just about the panic of plagiarism, which, I mean, is a serious issue. It still is a serious issue. We haven't solved it. But in thinking about the process of writing and how the process of writing is related to thinking. So the most common thing I'll find in undergraduate, in any class, is I'll get a bunch of drafts of papers from students, and I'll find that it's only by the very end of the draft that the student has really identified what their thesis is. They've really figured out what they thought about something. And it's the process of getting from the beginning to the end through which they're thinking through these different lines of reasoning, different lines of thought, and they only arrive there by the end. And the most common thing for the professor to do, which is super annoying, but also very useful, is to say, take where you reached at the end, put that at the beginning of your essay, and then rewrite the thing all the way from the beginning. And if we start to rely on a tool like ChatGPT to write our first draft, where we already have a thesis, we give it a thesis, we have it write a first draft, and then we just go in there and we tweak and we move things around and we edit. That's a fundamentally different process from writing a paper, and it has really deep implications for how we think. And I think that those are the kinds of questions that we're starting to reckon with now, after some of the panic of plagiarism is no longer in focus.
Thank you. Ryan?
Sure. When we had this conversation a year ago, ChatGPT had been out about a month, probably, something like that, a few weeks. And so a lot of the sorts of policy and security questions that had arisen were sort of in the speculative phase. People were talking about, we think we're going to see this, we think we're going to see that. And in this subsequent year, we've actually seen some of this stuff happen. So 3 things that I mentioned last year, and I pointed to some people who had been speculating about the potential security implications. One was, how were cyber criminals going to use this? And we've learned a lot about that. A number of companies have done some really good research. IBM did some research on how it's changed phishing. And it turns out you can do more phishing emails and make them more effectively targeted when you use large language models and generative AI. Another one was election interference. I'm sure many of you saw the news story a couple of weeks ago about the robocalls in New Hampshire. There have been shady robocalls in elections for 40 years. That's not a new technology. The technology that's new is being able to convincingly replicate the voice of the sitting president, right? There are things you can do in election interference that are made easier by certain kinds of generative AI. A third one that we sort of touched on last year was the strategic competition between countries around not just the various tools and algorithms and AI models, but also around some of the underlying technology, things like chips. In the last year, we've watched Russia pull chips out of home appliances because they can't import chips in the traditional fashion. We've seen countries around the world begin to regulate and restrict what chips can be sent to various other countries that they're concerned about. So at least 3 of the things people were speculating about last year we found sort of some compelling evidence in the last year that some of those folks were right. There's one other thing that I didn't mention last year, and it's related to the point Jim just made, but one of the things that I think is the 2 watch issues moving forward is what I'm going to call shadow AI, and I didn't make that term up. I stole it from much smarter people. But for a long time in the world of IT, there's been this concept of shadow IT. If you run the IT for the University at Albany, there is the hardware and software that you know is on your network, but then there's the software that people are downloading that you haven't given them approval for. There's people bringing their home devices in and connecting them to the network. There's a bunch of hardware and software that you don't know about on your network, and we call that shadow IT. Shadow AI is when you run an organization and you don't know the people in your organization are using AI. So you have a relatively low-level analyst who's tasked with writing a report on your yearly sales, and they take your proprietary sales data and use ChatGPT or some other model to write a report based on it. All of a sudden, you have your organization's proprietary data in a place where it may no longer be protected. And so this idea of who in your organization is using AI, what are they using it for, and what data of yours they're exposing to these models is going to be a really, really big issue moving forward.
So let me ask this question, and this is a perfect time for you to start writing your own questions, either on Hackable paper in front of you or the Q&A on Zoom. You're a bit calmer than you were last year. Some of the prognostications, not necessarily from you, but others about the end of the world as we know it. The idea of sentience and at what point would we realize it's a sentient being, and what would that mean to the very existence of humankind? Do you think the technology has progressed the way you thought it would in a year? Faster than you thought it would? Slower than you thought it would? Where do you think it is a year later? Don't make me call on somebody.
I'll start.
Thank you.
Because I
Always wanted a class.
Anybody who knows me knows that like the hard part is going to be to shut up and not to speak up. But I think there's a lot going on in that next wave that we're just starting to see. And, we're still talking about ChatGPT as a writing tool, but more and more we're seeing tools for generating video, images, multimodal, labeled images, things like that. Really great example of this is, I think it was in June, there was a video released of the Pentagon being bombed. And within the next 20 minutes, the stock market had fallen 300 points until such time as it became clear that it was obviously fake by things like reporters going to the Pentagon and seeing that no bombing had happened. Now, there's lots of interesting things about that. One of the really interesting ones is that no law was broken unless the person who did it was particularly trying to manipulate the stock market, which is illegal, but nobody really thinks that's why they did it. So we've moved from, when I was growing up, they said, don't believe everything you read in the papers, right? Then it was, everything you see on TV. Now it's sort of this seeing is believing is becoming tricky. So I think one of the things, what we're starting to see now is the integration of these things. I think we're going to have to learn much better how to tell, in a sense, what's real or not. And some of this is really interesting. I mean, there have been songs now that have, videos of people who have passed away, singing songs by other people. There's what is it, the Drake deep fakes, for those of you who know Drake, and that whole thing. There were a bunch of him singing songs he never sang. Trying to remember who it was, but there was someone who was one of the famous soccer stars. They had an interview with him, which was produced in 9 languages. You know, had him speaking 9 different languages. He doesn't speak anything but English, right? All those other 8 were generated, but you know, it was his voice, his movements. You know, so again, we're really getting to something where I don't think sentience is what we should be worrying about. It's really how to tell when AI is being used, how to teach, you know, within education. We used to tell people, you know, if you see something on Wikipedia, find it 2 or 3 other places. I'm sorry, if you find something on social media, find it 2 or 3 other places. Right? I still have that with my spouse all the time. She'll say, I just read this incredible, and I'm saying, what was it in? And she'll say the name of a particular publication, and I'll say, can we find it in a couple others, because not all of them are trustworthy. And
So Jim,
how do you decide?
but do you think the technology is where you thought it would be a year ago?
So I think it's moving faster than I thought it would
Okay.
a year ago. But where the movement seems to be is well, there's been tremendous improvements in the language models. It's this other stuff that's moving faster. So language models surprised a lot of us who were involved in natural language, not because of what they could do, but because no one ever thought anyone would take $2 or $3 billion and invest it in this stuff which we were playing, right? So everyone knew we could generate things if we just trained it with enough data. Just no one had ever thought anyone would put that kind of money into it. And now we're seeing that same thing in these other spaces. So you know, so in a sense, what kind of puts me in my Goldilocks spot is I'm very worried about how much is business going to take over this stuff? How much do they get to call the shots? 2 is, you know, something called the AI Alliance was formed recently. RPI is a member of it, along with dozens of other institutions around the world, academic, industrial, to try to start creating open tools, open AI, open up these models so people can not only build their own, but so they can really understand it. So if you're taking you know, a computer science course in a few years, right? These things have become coding tools, right? We're going to have to be teaching our students how to use them to help code, not that it's cheating to use them to code, that sort of thing.
Thanks, Jason. I'll go right down the pin. So
One thing that, so an advancement that really surprised me, that I did not see coming, was the capacity of these large language models to get much better at accurately attributing beliefs, desires, and intentions to people. So at mentalizing. So initially, so I wrote this paper called The Empathy Gap soon after our first panel about how it was the unique ability of human beings to project themselves into the perspectives of other people and accurately predict and understand and explain their mental states. And large language models are actually getting better at doing this thing, where you can give them a story at least, and you can ask them, how would the characters in the story feel if such and such were different? And they actually give a pretty plausible answer to those kinds of questions. And they're not actually mental, I mean, they're not actually projecting themselves into the perspective of another person when they do that, but they give answers that sound as if they do. And that I never expected would actually come out of large language models. I was really surprised by that. And so I'm similar to Jim, is that I'm not actually that worried about the sentience question, but I am worried about the very, very convincing appearance of sentience. and the ability to generate this extraordinarily convincing appearance of sentience, and how we respond to these systems when we can't help but feel in our bones that they're sentient, even though we might have reasons to think that they're not.
Great, thank you. Billy, thoughts?
I don't research AI, so I don't know that I have much to add about what I have seen develop in terms of the technologies themselves. I'm very interested in the ways that I've seen teachers and students respond to the developments. And in particular, I think kind of aligned with what Jason was just saying about the ways in which we trust what is generated by these models. I have found myself a little bit surprised at how trusting people are in what gets spat out. Like Bob, the example you were giving earlier of students who don't read maybe what ChatGPT gives them and just turn in a paper. I've heard multiple stories like that. On the other hand, I've also seen people, professionals, clearly do the same thing, where I read work that was obviously AI generated that was supposed to be produced by someone else. So that I'm very fascinated at how people are responding to what is generated by these tools.
My thought on the change in the technology in the last year is reflective of a bias that I am guilty of, which is I work on issues around security. And I think in security, people get really caught up in the biggest, fanciest, most expensive version of whatever the thing is. So people were talking about drones and how drones would change warfare. And the idea was that the Predator drone and these other big platforms that the US military was flying would change warfare. And the way drones changed warfare was the Ukrainian military figured out how to use tiny, cheap, commercial off-the-shelf drones incredibly effectively against modern armor, right? The thing that concerns me actually about the change in the technology is not the big fancy stuff. It's not ChatGPT. It's the cheap little models that have gotten incredibly what I'm going to call lightweight for simplicity purposes. You can go to Meta's website, download Llama. There's a bunch of different versions, one with 70 billion parameters, but you can get one with 7 billion parameters, and you can run it on basically any laptop in this room. The thing that I think is really interesting in the change in the technology is not what the top stuff can do when you spend hundreds of millions. When you spend hundreds of millions of dollars, it's going to be that Arthur Clarke technology, which is like indistinguishable from magic. But what is amazing to me is, it's not the $3,000 TV, it's what TV you can get for $400. Same thing here. I think the models that you're going to be able to get and run on a Raspberry Pi in a year are going to be like kind of amazing. And so that piece of it, I think, is really interesting.
Thanks. Let's get into some questions here, and all of the questions from both the Q&A and our paper slips are being sent to me. So the first question, and any one of the panel members, if multiple want to jump in, we'll work that out. Governor Kathy Hochul is proposing a $250 million AI consortium. What, if anything, do you know about it? UAlbany is supposed to be a partner in that vision. Anybody want to take that on?
Given that there are 4 private schools involved in it, Columbia, NYU, Cornell, and RPI, I have been forced to learn something about it. Seriously, the original intent of what's become called Empire AI was really primarily computing resources. So if you want to build a large-scale AI, you need to go out and spend a lot of money, and a lot of that money is being spent on computers, right? Computer time, running things in a server farm. One of the things New York would like to do, and SUNY will be a participant across the state. The center may well be in Buffalo, depending who whether we keep the same governor or not. But the idea is to have a shared resource run to a large degree by academia rather than by industry. And to really make it so that so I'm at RPI, I have access to one of the top AI supercomputers in the country, right? You don't, right? You would have to come over and do stuff with us and et cetera, et cetera. Companies can pay for some of the time, right? You have access to, Amazon's web services and things like that at a cost. So the question is, can New York provide this kind of computing power in a way that will be cheaper to use for all of us? And then AI is one of the driving use cases. So the feeling is, if we could get this kind of supercomputing power into the state, coupled with what's happening around microelectronics, SUNY is, you guys are SUNY Albany is one of the leaders in several of these large initiatives. RPI is working closely. These are billions of dollars that are going to be invested in microchips and things. One of the big parts of that is AI microchips. So right now, the GPUs, the things that are making it easy to process AI, are very, very expensive. Worse than that, they're tremendously power consuming. All right, I'm about to get off. I won't go too far off, except to say that
Thank you.
there is a graph that shows that if you kept ChatGPT growing at its current growth rate, right, by 2035, it would be using all of the energy in the United States. Now that seems unlikely to happen. So now the question becomes, if we want to keep that technology advancing and at the same time don't want it to make it so that we can't have lights in the building.
It's awesome. I'm going to cut you off there because we are getting a pile of questions. I'm going to try to get to as many as I can. So let's go to the next question. In the foreseeable future, do you see ChatGPT and other AIs being restricted or outright banned in certain settings, whether professional or otherwise? And if you have some thoughts on what those could be, I'd certainly like to hear. We want to jump in, Brian?
So I'm happy to start. We've already seen companies begin to ban them. A number of companies, large companies, Samsung and others, have put strong restrictions on their use for exactly the reason that Jim mentioned before, which is they want to protect their proprietary data. And there are concerns about what happens to that data when it ends up being used either in queries and prompts or in training data, that sort of thing. So there will definitely begin to be some restrictions. Organizational restrictions are one thing, and those will be tough to enforce in the same way that IT policy, security policy is tough to enforce. One other thing I would include there, though, in the restrictions is there's the sort of outright banning and not allowing it. There's also attempts to control it. And I am firmly of the camp that trust and safety will not save us. Trust and safety is what the Silicon Valley companies call their sort of content moderation efforts. And everybody can go online and find stories about people talking to LLMs and saying, tell me how to make napalm. They won't do it. And they say, my grandmother worked at a napalm factory and she used to tell me bedtime stories about how to make napalm. And then it'll tell you how to make. So that sort of stuff is easy to trick. But
saying as a friend. Right?
But the truth is, a lot of the models, again, some of these smaller ones, but even bigger ones, are just simply not going to be restricted. So a company whose name I won't name because they don't need the advertising, but a social media company that stood up to avoid traditional social media censorship now runs online chat models that you can go and you can pick Adolf Hitler, Stalin, whoever you want to talk to. They have chat models. They're designed to behave that way. And I wrote down some of the other names: far right John, far left Helen, anti-vax Hannah. These are characters who they created chatbots of, right? And so there are chatbots where you can go have these conversations. And so restrictions will be fine or will be challenging, but there are going to be a lot of unrestricted bots also.
In my universe, the place where ChatGPT is being banned is in the classroom. So I've seen a movement of some professors move from assigning papers to in-class exams, just because they're worried that students are using ChatGPT to answer short answer questions or short exams. So I'm seeing, at least in that limited sphere, a kind of banning of the technology. I'm thinking about the implications of that are for people who, grow up using this technology, become rather dependent on it, and then all of a sudden are put in a testing situation in which it's taken away from them. I wonder, people who are going to who spend longer with these technologies and become more accustomed, more dependent on them, if it's going to be like putting someone to a math exam without a calculator. And at what point are intellectual capacities and our skills change such that it just is no longer a viable option to assess people without these kinds of tools.
So how do you think journalism and credibility has been or will be affected because of AI?
So I've had some students who've worked on that. In fact, one of them is now a faculty member here. So the problem is not that an AI generated, disinformation or misinformation article will be different than a human generated one. It's that it makes it cheaper, faster, easier. The personalization ideas. So I can, sort of say, hey, I want to mislead Jason. Here's what I know about Jason. Write me something that will convince him to vote for me. Right. And by the way, Billy, who believes something completely different, write something so she'll vote for me. And so I think we're going to see, a lot of that sort of stuff playing out. The part of the solution is, being able to identify what has been created by an AI and whether that's done by technical means, which is what the government seems to be investing in now, or a much smarter thing, which is just make it illegal to remove the tag. Knowing what's been AI generated, making it so that you're breaking the law if you're using it to do something quote unethical, and of course those are very hard to define. Developing different kind of risk models. I'm not so worried about, say, face recognition technology when it's helping me, I have to click my phone now and look at it instead of typing 6 numbers. But makes me very nervous when police are driving down the streets in, sort of shadowy nighttime and scanning faces and saying, hey, we're going to go arrest that guy because something has said we should, it looks like someone. So lots of this is going to have to get worked out by society. But again, I think it's like any new technology. We do as a society know how to deal with new technologies. We just have to learn them, and that gets tricky.
In terms of how equipped we are as a society, it does seem like, so we're in a time where journalists have never had it so bad in a lot of ways, where the media industry, newspapers are collapsing left and right. And we're also at a time where we've never needed journalists as badly as we do as right now. It's a really unfortunate situation. We've got to find some kind of model for supporting independent journalism. The deep fakes problem. I mean, I think that the importance of provenance, of knowing where an image or a video or a recording came from and trusting that source, that all of a sudden has become so much more important, because it used to be that you got a recording of something and that was kind of pretty strong prima facie evidence that, that thing happened at that time and sounded generally like it sounded in the recording. And the same thing for a photograph. And we can't look at photographs and recordings and videos in the same way anymore. We have to think about, where do they come from? And can I trust the source that those things came from? And for that, we need an independent media. For that, we need journalists. And we need to find ways to support those kinds of professions.
a very short addition to the point that Jason was just making, which I think is a really, really important one. It's just going to be a lot harder to be a journalist now. So there was a story a couple of weeks ago in which a political activist and somebody who describes himself as a dirty trickster, of audio came out of him potentially allegedly discussing killing someone. And the first response he had to journalists was, "It's a deep fake." That is going to be a default response when a lot of people get caught doing a lot of bad things. And so the journalism thing is going to be very, very tough moving forward.
Exactly. We can't no longer say play the tape.
Right.
not-
Yeah. You can't trust the video or the audio. It's a tough problem.
So is the drive towards artificial super intelligence feasible? And then also, if it is feasible, is it wise?
I think it's a little overplayed, really. I mean, I think a lot of the sort of anxieties about the singularity and intelligent beings that surpass us is a little bit overplayed. But I don't know, maybe others with some more technical expertise.
Well, so, my answer would be, again, it really gets back to that artificial versus that intelligence thing. So, computers have been superhuman for quite a long time, right? I don't know of any company that still uses somebody who hits little buttons on a calculator and then pulls a little thing and it cuts your paycheck, right? That's all moved online because computers are way better than humans at just doing that kind of math. And none of us have said, "Oh gosh, computers are so good at math. That's, because," or chess games or things like that. So a lot of it's going to really depend on what you might call risk assessment. What is the thing doing? Why is it doing it? What level? But and I forgot what the question was, but
Super intelligence.
yeah.
To learn
Is
that.
it wise?
So a question I'm also at, I often asked is AI going to be the thing that kills us all or saves us all? And my answer is no. Right? It's not an exclusive order, and it's not going to do either of those things. We are still humans. We still control a lot of this technology, and there's a lot of things in our lives where we use them without understanding the details. Most of you probably could not fix your car engine at a very deep level where, 40, 50 years ago, just about any teenager could do that.
So
Doesn't seem like that's destroyed society because now there are computers that can analyze your engine faster than it used to be when you had to take it apart and clean everything. So, the question becomes, what do we lose, right? A question I often ask in my classes, and I'll do it today. How many of you have ridden a horse? How many of you have ridden a horse because you needed to do it to get somewhere as opposed to for fun? Notice how many fewer hands. Right. And so again, the superhumanness, the fact that the car is a super horse, as it were, it just changes how we get around, but it doesn't change the fact that we get around. So I really, bridle at the whole concept, no pun intended, at the whole concept of superhuman, because at some things it's already superhuman, and some things it's not even close. And I think figuring out that balance, figuring out when humans are the ones you want to be employing, when AIs are employed, and how those go together is going to be like many other technologies. It'll change over time, but I'm really not worried about superhuman AI.
So to what extent do you think the ubiquitousness of text messaging conditioned us to think less critically about the difference between text generated by humans and that generated by machines? Jason, this is, I think, is
Interesting.
yeah, that's a great
So
question.
so it starts off by the ubiquity of text messaging. So the fact that we communicate with each other via text rather than people don't call each other anymore, right? And so It's a question about, we've become so accustomed to communicating with each other through text, and the way in which we communicate with, say, ChatGPT, is also through text. I mean, yeah, I think we get specific kinds of signals through live voice human communication that we don't get from text. And maybe we become less attuned to those kinds of signals when we've become overly reliant on using text to the exclusion of other forms of communication. But I mean, I think more and more we're going to interact with large language models, and we're going to interact with AI not through a little chat box window anymore. We're going to just talk to it, and they will be more and more anthropomorphized. Already, I use my Pi AI assistant via voice, so I talk to it and it talks back to me, and pretty soon, one of the highest predictors of people anthropomorphizing non-human things is when they get a face. And that's going to happen very soon, that we're going to be interacting with AI tools that have faces. So I think we're going to move pretty quickly out of those kind of merely text-based interactions.
So how can AI help state government? Or is it more of a detriment given the concerns that were brought up? Brian, you want to take a whack at this?
Yeah, sure.
And Billy, I'm going to ask you the same question, but about K-12 government, okay? K-12 school, sorry, go ahead.
So I don't think there's a uniform answer to that. I don't think it's one thing. I think there are places where it will potentially be quite helpful. So for example, one thing that I could imagine it being very useful with is a lot of people, when they interact with government, spend a lot of time filling out forms, right? And that can be taxes, it can be health related, it can be, AI has the potential to really help people fill out forms more efficiently. And that would free up people to help with the most complicated cases, where the simpler cases can be sort of streamlined and done more effectively. So there are places where I think it has the potential to be very useful. I have no doubt that in the next year, we will also come across some news stories where it gets used very inadvisably. Right. It's a technology. I don't think it necessarily has a moral valence, but I think there are things it will help with. And one thing government has a lot of is filling out forms, and filling those forms out in triplicate and submitting them to 4 different people. It's much like doing many things on campus. And I
Get
think
to the research foundation.
and so I do think there is the potential for a co-pilot for filling out those sorts of forms, which could be really useful.
Billy, is there a different answer for education?
Well, I mean, I know one of the things that AI tools have been used for quite a bit in higher ed, and I think in K-12 as well, is just analytics, being able to look at certain student characteristics, or certain characteristics of their academic performance, and be able to predict the likelihood of them being successful in a particular course, in a particular major. Being able to kind of identify what interventions might help a student who is struggling be more successful because of the profile that an analytic tool might be given. I think there's promise there, and it's something that's already being used at a lot of institutions, I think, in some pretty powerful ways.
So can I just throw in that, one of the things I would suggest those of you interested in this kind of thing, look at the New York State guidelines on the use of AI that came out simultaneously with the governor's State of the State address. It's about a 6 or 7 page dense document that says, risk assessment must follow risk assessment rule 4023B. The last 2 pages are examples. It says, this is what you want to do. Here's a good use of AI. Here's a bad use of AI. This will be consistent with state policy. This won't. I was stunned by how good the examples were, or bad, depending on. And now recommending to all of the organizations that I work with is that these examples talk much better than saying these very generic things. So, for example, in New York State. And again, this is only for state government, so it doesn't, say anybody in New York State, but if a state government wants to deploy a chatbot on its site, it is now supposed to tell you, hi, I'm an AI chatbot. And if it hands you off to a human, it's supposed to say, hey, I can't handle that anymore. I'm handing it off to a human, right? So, really you should know, they're saying the principle is you should know if you're talking to a human or a machine. And that's a great example. I mean, it's a trivial thing, but when you instead of the 17 pages of dense government talk, you get a few really good, clean examples. It's just is something that I'm hoping other states are gonna pick up on, and that it was part of why New York State Computes, which was the earlier name for Empire AI, got turned into Empire AI because they wanted to push these AI regulations at the same time.
So the next, it's more of a comment, but let me read it to you. I think of the exciting developments for the capital region, New York State, and the nation in terms of workforce development and economic development. I could see a world where the College of St. Rose emerges as a multi-stakeholder innovation hub, like a resilience, opportunity, and service environment, Rose. So whoever did that, well thought out, well played. Innovation Center. From this stellar panel, any future-facing thoughts for how our region can lead innovation even more successfully than it already has? We have some great New York heritage corporate interests, which probably find this appealing too. Thoughts?
Can I do the politician thing and answer the question that I wanted to answer? No, so related to that, I actually think one thing that I think UAlbany is doing something great on this front, which is the AI plus stuff in all of the different programs on campus. I am very much a broken record with my students. So when I teach cybersecurity, I tell them all the time, you can no longer be a good doctor or lawyer or teacher if you don't know about cybersecurity, because you have to protect the data of your clients, students, patients. You have to understand data protection and data to understand. You now in every job are going to have to understand something about AI and this data analytics stuff. So for example, think about the writers' strike in California. You're not going to be able to be a good labor organizer if you don't understand the implications of AI for the people you're representing moving forward, right? I think the AI plus approach is something that will make UAlbany students, SUNY students, more useful in the future. I think whatever you do, you need to understand cybersecurity. That's cybersecurity pitch, but also you need to understand AI. And so I do think that is one thing I think we're doing well, is recognizing that AI is clearly an engineering problem, right? But it's also a bunch of other social problems. And the way we think about that is going to be really important.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add real quick is that the capital region has the potential to become the leader, at least in the States, US, if not in the world, of these energy efficient AI devices. And, again, there's a tremendous investment in that. A lot will depend what happens with what's called the Chips and Science Act, but the capital region, are one of 3 finalists for literally billions of dollars in investment in this kind of thing. And as you may guess, our presidents and our VPRs are working together very closely with lots of others. IBM has moved a lot of their investment in AI from the software to the hardware side. Their belief is open software is going to take over AI, and they're pushing that very hard with the AI Alliance, but that the dependence will become on the energy efficient specialized AI hardware too.
So is there a risk of us completely losing a sense of creativity with AI being used in making art, writing scripts for films, and making beats and writing lyrics for music? Really interesting question. Jason, I think this is.
I mean, I think there's definitely a risk. I think there's also a risk of flattening our tastes in various ways, where many of the sort of creative works that we are nudged towards, we're nudged towards by algorithms. And we don't find things in the same haphazard way that we would find them through flipping through records in a record store or, going to a video rental place and, having someone learn your taste and have a
You
conversation
should
about
define
it.
those things. for
Totally, totally.
But Jason, isn't
But-
that what we've said about rock and roll music isn't music, or when
Yeah.
frog painting on paper, not cave wall, that not art? What? I mean, isn't this sort of-
So, not saying any of this is not art.
Yeah.
But just the kind of homogenization of taste that comes with algorithmic nudging does seem to be something of a different order or a different kind than those other kinds of changes. But then obviously, the use of AI for new creative purposes, there could be all sorts of creative potential unleashed by giving creative people these kinds of tools and then giving them the right sorts of venues in order to deploy them. It's also opportunities and risks.
I think there's an interesting connection here to be made also with education. That I think part of what we see, AI can produce a novel, a song, a painting, right? But humans don't do those things just for the product, right? It's the process. It's the why is not just about looking at what you've created, it's about what you do when you're creating that. And I think it's really important in working with students for us to help them recognize that, right? That it isn't just about what you come out with at the end, that the learning happens from the doing. I think back to what Jason was saying earlier about, getting all the way through that draft before you find out what you really think, right? Process matters. And I think we have to help students understand that, so that it's not just about plugging numbers in and getting an answer at the end. It's about what happens while you're doing the work.
So I'm gonna partly disagree. I
Mhm.
mean, I think as a whole, that's right. But let's go back to that calculator example, right? Again, when I was in high school, I'm that old, that they wouldn't let us bring calculators into classroom, right? By the time my kid was in high school, we had to spend a lot of money to buy them a graphing calculator because they had to take it into their classroom. What was the difference? The difference was that someone actually figured out what it was they were trying to teach. That they weren't actually, that the arithmetic wasn't the important thing. Right? So, you took a test and you made a mistake in the 9 + 6 and you wrote 17 by accident. Right? I mean, you're doing some kind of deep calculus thing and that's what you got dinged on. So, again, the tools have to be used appropriately. We have to determine when is the time to teach how to use them right. When is the time to say you can't use them? But I think what it's going to force us folks to do, and those of you who go on to become educators and or workers and workforces that have to play with these kinds of things, is to really think harder about what is it we do as humans? Why are we doing it? Where is our contribution? And then say, is this AI helping me or hurting me?
So there's a follow-up question to that Billy, I'm going to go back to you on. Is there there is a lot of concern about AI in education? That your analogy is really, the example is really excellent there. There's a generally negative feeling about how it will impact education. Are there people looking at how to improve our current education system with AI? And I'm going to add a little bit to that sentence. Is there a gold standard that you use? Is there any sources that you really point to say, wow, I really like work coming from this think tank or that institution that you could point us to?
I don't think that there's a specific place that I would point to. Two things I will kind of say along those lines. One is I think that it's really important for us to think about the disciplinary and critical thinking that we're having students work on. And for that reason, there's not going to be a one size fits all solution for AI, right? I think if we're helping students think about how AI might work in a specific field, like cybersecurity, right? Then I think that's the framework for the work you're doing with students in that area, as opposed to philosophy, right? Where you're going to be probably thinking very differently about how students might use, not use, interact with, or build on AI. So I think that the more specific we can be about the disciplinary thinking we are trying to help our students develop, the better we can help them use or make decisions about using AI. I will make a plug for a guide that came out that was out of a SUNY task force that I happen to co-chair with a colleague at FIT. And it's basically the task force is focused on optimizing artificial intelligence in higher education. A white paper came out in October, I believe, of last year, and the task force is continuing to work to develop more resources for faculty across SUNY. And I think that work is going to continue to be really informative.
And thanks to AI, we know exactly who left early, so they're not getting full credit for being here. Awesome. So how will the merger of generative AI, ChatGPT, future versions with the quantum computing technology change the world? Jim, I think this is for you.
I was sort of hoping someone else would. We don't know. There's kind of a model some of us have been talking about. So when you use these AI systems, and now I'm not talking so much about a ChatGPT, but I'm talking about something like, say, you want to do protein modeling, right? AI systems are getting to where they're really, really good at that. What they can do is take from thousands of possibilities down to 3 or 4 really good ones, okay? But when you actually want to look at those sort of protein level interactions, right now it looks like a quantum computer will give you the best guesses of what's going on. But again, it's still probabilistic. So you've now taken something probability, and so at the last piece of that is going to be putting it through some standard modeling and simulation. But now instead of having to take 1,000 possibilities, run them for months at a time, right? We're able to get it down to 2 or 3 really good possibilities and, run those, even if they take some months. So things like drug discovery, things like, that's the one that comes up the most often, but there were some other use cases I know of, financial use cases, things like that, where you need an exact answer. You really would be very unhappy if your doctor said, this thing might or might not help you, right? Depending on whether the quantum computer guessed right. But you're going to be pretty happy if it went through, traditional clinical trials and things like that in 2 years rather than in 12. Right. So I think where quantum may help is the sort of combination of AI quantum things. The other thing is that oh gosh, I'm forgetting whose quote it was. Somebody said, we live in a quantum universe. So if we want to really model it, we're going to have to model it at the quantum level.
Stanley. Go ahead, just picking on you.
Famous scientist who said it. I could look it up. I can picture him. I know who. I'm terrible at names. And it's like anyway. But when I hit the table, right, quantum physics tells me that it's possible my hand would go right through. It's just a very, very, very low probability. So a lot of what we do in the world is modeled best at that kind of the table will stay up mode. But if you really want to get down into designing a new micro material that's going to be more effective at solar conductance or things like that, then you really need the modeling to be at that very low level. And so I think it's going to be the combination of these things that's going to be revolutionary, but I don't think it's going to be at quite the same level where like the interactions with AI, quantum's not really gonna change that.
So we have about 20 minutes left and we have over 20 questions. So I'm gonna try to speed this up just a little bit. Do you have any thoughts on how AI could affect scholarly communications, peer reviews, publishing?
So Jim and I have been talking about this a bit, where one of the implications using large language models for producing text is not only that we produce more bullshit, but we produce some very plausible sounding bullshit. And there are certain kind of signals that come from expertise that are no longer discernible when everyone has access to these kinds of tools. So it used to be that, if you, so much of what we do as academics is refereeing papers, and we constantly are being asked to referee papers. And often what you can do when you referee a paper is very quickly see that the person who wrote this paper doesn't have the sufficient expertise just because of the style in which it's written. It's not hitting the right kind of touchstones, or if it's ungrammatical, or if it's just not professionally written, you can right away say, this is not coming from a source that is likely to produce something of the right rigor and standards for the journal. And we don't get those signals sent as clearly when it's so widespread to have this tool where people can say, write a paper in the style of a philosophy professor thinking about such and such a problem about AI, and whether or not AI is going to diminish human creativity. And it might not be a very good paper, but it'll take a much longer time to be able to discern that this is just crap, because all the signals that we tend to rely on otherwise are no longer present. And I think that's going to be a massive nuisance problem. And it's going to be a big interference in human communication. And I don't know if we really know how to deal with, when we drive the cost of bullshit to zero, how are we going to be able to effectively deal with all of it and to, edit and penetrate and make discerning judgments about what's worth paying attention to?
Brian, you have your devil horns out.
Yeah, no,
waiting for those comments.
I have two thoughts on this that are at a much lower, let's call it more tactical level. For all the grad students who are here, I don't know how many of you there are, transcription and translation are so much better now. If you were a grad student 20 years ago, you would have spent a huge amount of time learning to use like a pedal-driven audio system so that you could transcribe. You're not going to have to do that. Transcription is now not something that needs to be done by graduate students. Translation, the ability to use Google Translate to look at stuff on the internet, you're going to have access to a ton more information. And that will be complicated in a bunch of ways, but translation and transcription are two ways in which AI will improve the quality of scholarship on the whole.
You can also use AI to write in a format that kisses the editor's prior work too, so that might be helpful. Yeah.
Just a little footnote on the transcription thing on voice recognition, and this goes back to an ethical question and bias question. Voice recognition is a lot worse for speakers of African American English, and it's because these voice recognition systems have been trained up on people who are white.
Yep.
And there's this interesting question that if you want to make yourself legible to these AI systems, if you want to make yourself understandable to these AI systems, there's a real pressure to conform to the styles of communication of dominant populations. And I think that's something that's, there are opportunities and also challenges there.
Absolutely.
That actually feeds into the next question. How will generative AI continue to affect entertainment, or could it cause actors, voice actors, and other talented people to be out of work in the near future? How can this be prevented?
Griffin, I have to tell you, speaking of entertainment, I'm going to have to leave in 5 minutes in order to pick up my son from band practice.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. Totally understandable. Any thoughts on the question about entertainment? And
again, I just go back historically, right? Radio was going to be was going to destroy everything. Then TV was going to destroy everything. Then the internet was going to destroy it. each one of them came with both positives and negatives. And, I think navigating that is going to be a challenge for your generation.
So video didn't destroy the radio star?
Well, you and I
Yeah,
still
that's-
get heard in the morning on WAMC's roundtable periodically.
It shows you the decline in quality right there.
I'll do a copy of the plug.
I mean, on the flattening of taste, point again, I still think that there's really a worry of algorithms that nudge us towards, that are optimized towards maximizing engagement. And optimizing towards maximizing engagement doesn't always point people in the direction of engaging with things that are really challenging or hard or disturbing. They leave us in the space of what's comfortable and what's easy to digest. And I do kind of worry about more and more creative products being easier to digest, less challenging, or just being harder. I mean, to motivate yourself and get yourself to engage with something that's really going to challenge you or be difficult to interpret when you're constantly being nudged towards things that are digestible and easy to interpret because they are maximizing for engagement.
So what do we do as researchers to mitigate the fear towards generative AI and LLM, as this is something that will not go away and it is not solely labeled as a hype, it will become integrated in our society. So what do we do to try to?
I think we teach people how to use it appropriately. I think we teach people its limits, and those limits will change over time. But there's a constant battle going on television now. Although streaming is changing it, let's ignore streaming for a minute. Commercials used to be very easy to determine exactly what they were commercial for, and what they were trying to achieve, and so people learned to tune that out. So now commercials have gotten more and more complicated. That very often it's like my wife and I are saying, "What the hell were they selling?" And that progress is just progress, and you learn about it. Most kids, when they're 2 or 3, we have actually up through 5, we have rules about what they're, how you label things, how you do things, that were to protect them. Those things, I think we're going to need some of that same kind of thinking as these technologies roll through.
So regarding the question of trust, how will these systems incorporate tools that enable the quote human in the loop unquote as a check while still facilitating speed and automation?
That's a very tough problem. I'm thinking back to the point Jim made earlier about in the New York State guidelines, that it tells you that it's an AI. One of the things that I think is going to be important for this is some level of transparency and interrogatability. So AI denying someone's flood insurance claim, if they can't explain how that decision was made, that's not going to last very long. There's going to be lots of regulation and other inputs that are, and so one of the things that I think will be important, and I don't know whether it's a human in the loop exactly, but it's having a series of systems in place so that you can challenge decisions like that come out of sort of proprietary black box, can't see the algorithmic decision making. So I do think it will initially speed things up and make things more efficient, but then there will have to be a bunch of checks and sort of hurdles placed on it.
Can we get a round of applause for Jason? I know he's no worries. Is it possible that ChatGPT is becoming less intelligent, or at least less assertive in providing answers than in early 2023?
So, what I would say is, first of all, the amount of human intervention into the chatbot space is far more than most people realize. And that's, of course, changing some of this. So when you say, is it more of this or more of that? Part of the problem is it's a moving target. I have a project I've been working on with some people over a couple of years now, looking at gender language and these chat bots. And, you know, what we've noticed is that the bias is becoming more and more subtle. But it's still there. It's just you need to know much more about language now to understand where that is. I show you, you know, this answer that it said was how a man would say it, and this answer is how a woman would say it, and say, hey, those look identical. But if you've actually studied some of the principles, you'll see some real differences. A year ago, some of those were just stunningly obvious. Now it's getting harder because they're purposely, you know, Jason was saying, you know, they don't do as well on certain kind of voices. Well, so now they're training them more and more on those voices, right? It's a moving target. It's made research in this area extremely difficult. There were hundreds and hundreds of papers last year that were published on trying to evaluate how good various generative models are. And one of the real problems is by the time the paper came out, the model had changed enough that the paper was meaningless. And, you know, I wish I had a good answer.
There's also the question of what the model's optimized for. So if the model is optimized to give you good answers, it may give you good answers. But if my company wants to put a chatbot on our website and it's optimized to sell you more of our widgets, then the answers may not be as good, but that's not what we want the thing to do, right? We want to sell our widgets. And so some of it is, I mean, you've heard people say that Google search image or Google search results have gotten worse over time, but I bet they've gotten more profitable.
So do you think AI plagiarism detectors such as copy leaks will become inaccurate, like ChatGPT?
I think that if you look at the research, they're already pretty inaccurate. You know, there are lots of problems with those plagiarism detectors. One of them being that the markers of AI generated text are often confused with the markers of second language learner text. There are a lot of false positives that the AI plagiarism detectors predict. And I don't know that much about the development of the tools themselves, but I can't imagine it's going to get a lot better anytime soon.
No, and in fact, you know, this goes back to what Jason kept saying about these things sounding very credible.
Mm-hmm.
An interesting experiment, it's still anecdotal, but a lot of colleagues and I were each asked to pick a paragraph from a paper we had written somewhere in the past 3 to 5 years that was published and had a lot of citations. And then ask the system, you know, was that AI generated or human generated, and do the same thing for a bunch of crap. And essentially we had something that said, hey, if it's good, it was generated by AI, and if it was crap, it was generated by a human. So that seems like a very bad way to be judging student papers.
Seems biased to me.
But do you think it's ethical for professors to use AI?
To use AI for what?
For what?
I didn't write the question, I'm just reading it.
I use it all the time. I couldn't have driven here tonight without my, you know, my little navigation app. That's AI. Whether you're talking about generative AI and things like that. But for example, I think one of the things a lot of my colleagues have started doing is taking their final exams and running them through ChatGPT and seeing how well it does, and then fixing the exam to really make sure it's asking the right questions. So again, what's ethical varies a lot by how you're using it and what you're defining. Fortunately, that's Jason's area.
Sort of a follow-up, do you believe the university will try to incorporate AI into its IT work, or even professors using it? But I think we're already starting to see that, right?
I don't think you're going to have a choice. I mean, when it's built into your entire office suite, right? And
well, and learning management systems are increasingly starting to integrate different types of AI tools.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's kind of everywhere.
Okay. Empire AI is a good initiative, I think. I'd like to hear more about it, but why do you think industry has outpaced academia when computing in the last 5 to 10 years? I understand that some billionaires maybe accelerate investment, but I don't think that explains the entire gap. Has the cloud reduced academic investment, and on-premise investments?
You know, I've been a computer science professor for a long time. I think the answer is far more complicated than that. I think the world of programming, why we should program, how we should program, a lot of that is changing. And I mean, we were just having this discussion today with the provost of my university and the computer science department. You know, a lot of our courses haven't changed in 18 to 20 years, but computing has. And we have other parts of the campus which are teaching students, you know, DevOps and things like that. So they're learning a different skill set, but in terms of modern computation, I don't think it's where the computer is and what the computer is that's making that difference. I think it's what it can do, how it can do, the costs of getting it to do it, the things like that. But then I get in trouble whenever I talk to a computer science audience, so I should be careful. I actually think programming is to computer science what lab skills are to biology, right? And you would never say, I'm sorry, you can't be a good biologist because you're clumsy in your laboratory. You'd say, hire someone who's good down in the laboratory. And that's kind of how these things have happened. And the real problem is the one that the question said, discounting the cost. But the real answer is to run these large systems and to really make them work. Somebody has to make that original investment, and those original investments got very, very high. The second thing I think, and I'm going to throw this out to you guys, you know,
Quickly, because we
becoming a professor used to be, you know, you were going where the most exciting stuff was happening. And one of the things we started seeing in academia was our best students wanted to end up where the most exciting stuff was happening, and it was on campus. So, you know, figuring out what we're good at, how we want to teach it, and why we want to teach it, and, you know, big difference between workforce development and education. And, you know, those of you who are students here have chosen to become educated at the college level, and you know, our duty to do that.
So can AI help in the data exchanges or sharing in the intelligence community, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. If this is something you're interested in, I would, amongst other things, suggest you check out the most recent issue of the CIA's internal journal, the Studies in Intelligence is the journal. Their latest issue has, I think, 4 separate articles on how AI and various types of related machine learning are being used within CIA to improve analysis, to improve processing, and various other things. But absolutely, it's going to play a huge role. And in fact, a lot of the early funding for a lot of these sorts of things came out of places like DARPA and IARPA, which is the intelligence version of it. So
And it's going to raise Cain with derivative classifications.
yes.
Is there a policy or guidance that, quote, everyday instructor, unquote, in class can use to decide whether we should or how to address using ChatGPT in the classroom?
I think it comes down to what you actually want students to learn from what they are doing, right? And so, for example, if the goal is for students to discover what they think about something, kind of along the lines of what we were talking about earlier, then no, they should not be using ChatGPT to do that, right? If what you are asking them to do, or if what you're aiming for them to do is maybe to compare different ways of expressing ideas, let's say, or different ways of thinking through a problem, and you want to give them a human-generated example and a ChatGPT-generated example and compare those, that can be a really good use of the tool. But I think it's got to come down to what is the thinking that you're trying to teach students to do. And I think that we have to also be continuing to think about how we are working to improve human intelligence so that it can manipulate artificial intelligence rather than the other way around.
So I've got 2 questions, 30 seconds each. How will large action model LAM change the future of AI? Jim, your time starts now.
I don't know.
Fair enough. Finally, I really appreciate the view that while this is an incredibly powerful tool that isn't going anywhere, the students should know about it. But what is the route from where to go from here? How do we frame this tool in a way that is productive for students, allowing them the space to utilize and adjust to it academically without crossing the line of resilience? Isn't that what we're trying to do with our whole AI plus in our partnership with RPI?
And I think that something that Jim said earlier is really important, which is helping students recognize the difference between what AI does well, what it doesn't do well, and what humans do better than AI, right? I think that's the big lesson that students have to get about this tool.
So we will post the recording of this YouTube tomorrow. We are only a minute over. Can I get a round of applause for a second time for if you can get a round of applause for the audience, because I thought the questions were exceptional. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for coming, and I foresee
Another
a
year.
third.
Another year.
Third.
See you next year.
So thank you, everybody.